I chose to read aloud the book George by Gino. This book is a part of my TED Talk collection. The book is based off of a true story about Gino's life and what they experienced as a child. Gino has the opportunity to write this book because they lived through all those reactions presented and have insight based on their personal perspective and their personal experiences. This book is a fantastic novel about a child who has a big secret and they wonder if they'll have to keep this secret forever and ever. Have you ever had or known about something that you didn't want anyone to know about? If you have, I bet you can relate to this book and can see yourself in this book as a mirror. All right, so today we're going to recap all the chapters that we've read so far and done our closed readings on. And today will be our last reading of chapter 6. And we're going to get more talking about the themes, talking about some of the vocabulary. And so let's just go ahead and go over the synopsis so far about the book. So I'm going to be reading from chapter 6, like I said, and it's titled Taken. Remember, we read it yesterday. So this story starts off about a fourth grade girl trapped in the body of a boy. While her family and classmates identify her as a male, George, who privately calls herself Melissa, knows she is truly a girl but doesn't know how to tell the other people that she loves and knows. George lives with her divorced mother and her older brother, Scott. Oftentimes after school, before her mother returns home from work, George looks through her stash of fashion magazines that she hides in a denim bag at the bottom of her closet. On the pages of 17 and other girl-marketed publications, Melissa, or George, admires images of flowing skirts and cashmere sweaters and longs to dress in such pretty clothes as the people in the magazines. So as she reads through those magazines, George imagines she joins them wearing her own bikini and introducing herself as Melissa, who is who she wants to be called, or what she wants to be called. At school, George's class is reading Charlotte's Web. So as George's teacher, Miss Dell, reads aloud the dying words of the spider Charlotte, George just falls apart and is crying, right? Remember that? So this emotional incident causes teasing from the classmates that are bullies, Jeff. Miss Dell responds by saying to George that he has such compassion and suggests that she will become a fine young man, which only makes George more upset because she says that he's a large man because of his secret. So Miss Adele then announces that the fourth grade will stage a production of Charlotte's Web and tryouts for the various roles will be held the following week. Well, George is beyond excited about the thought of playing Charlotte, but feels anxious and hesitant about auditioning for the part of a female character because he's afraid of what other people will think. So over the weekend, George practices for the audition with her best friend Kelly. Now, Kelly is an extremely strong personality and kind of bosses George around. So when George hesitantly admits to Kelly her desire to play Charlotte, Kelly encouraged George to read for the role at tryouts because it's just pretend, right? So that night, George dreams that she's Charlotte in the play. And when audition day arrives, Miss Adele distributes blue cards to boys who are trying out for the roles for boys and girl pink cards. So despite her blue card, George recites Charlotte's lines. She delivers a powerful, powerful performance, but Miss Adele dismissed it as a joke because it's a boy playing a girl part. And in the end, Kelly is cast as Charlotte, which has George just beside herself. So Miss Adele offers George the role of Wilbur, but George refuses. He chooses to work backstage instead. And at recess, Jeff and his sidekick Rick harass George as usual, calling her a freaking girl. Kelly defends George, protesting that he's not a girl, and after shaking off those bullies, George quietly suggests to Kelly that she is indeed a girl. Kelly promises to keep George's secret forever. But now we're going to reread chapter 6 called Taken, and we're going to discuss some of the vocabulary, some of the themes, and I have some questions for you guys. So chapter 6, Taken, okay? Mom flicked on the light in George's bedroom the next morning. Time to get moving. My alarm never went off. You already missed the bus. I'm driving you and your brother to school. Mom left the door of George's room ajar and cursed her way downstairs to the kitchen. George lugged her out of bed, shrugged on some clothing, and plodded downstairs. Let's think about that word plodded. It says George lugged her body out of bed, shrugged on some clothing, and plodded downstairs. What do you think that word plodded could mean? If it says that she lugged her body out of bed and shrugged on some clothes, how do you think that she's feeling? Do you think that she's doing it excitedly? Do you think she's kind of like stomping down the stairs because she's like, ugh, gotta go to school again? What do you think that word plotted means? Yes, exactly. Exactly. Moving on. Okay. So where's your backpack, Mom asks, brushing her hair with one hand as she guided her shoes onto her feet with the other. Upstairs, George answered groggily. Well, go get it. What about breakfast? You'll eat in the car. And don't forget your shoes. George gathered her things into her backpack, wiggled her feet into her sneakers, and trod back downstairs. Mom was already by the front door, rummaging in her purse for her keys. Think about that word rummaging. Let's read that sentence again. Use our context clues. Mom was already by the front door, rummaging in her purse for her keys. What do you think that word rummaging could mean? Do you think she just grabbed them out? Or do you think she was kind of like feeling around because she's got so much stuff in her purse, right? Have you ever seen your mom's purse got so much stuff in it, or grandma's purse? Rummaging. What do you think that means? Exactly, yes, yes. It means she was fiddling around in there trying to find them. So Mom was already by the front door, rummaging in her purse for her keys. Where's your brother? I don't know, said George. Probably still in bed. We'll go upstairs and get him. Tell him he has 1 minute to get down here, or it's no phone for a week. Can I pull the covers off of him? Sure. George bounded up the stairs once more, this time with proper motivation. Parent-condoned sibling cruelty was a rare gift, and not to be wasted. Mom had left the light on in Scott's room, but Scott was fully asleep, snoring away. George found the two bottom corners of his thick green comforter and whisked the blanket off in one solid yank. Hey, Scott rumbled. Mom said I could, said George. She also said no phone for a week if you're not downstairs in 1 minute. She just doesn't trust that I've got the situation under control, said Scott, already standing. He was wearing his favorite pair of jeans and a wrinkled black t-shirt. I try to maximize my rest so that I can be at my best for my education. And what does she do? Complain, complain, complain. He ran his fingers through his curly hair a few times and slipped his feet into tall, unlaced boots. Then he slung his backpack over one shoulder and jogged down the stairs. George followed. You look like you slept in that, Mom declared. I did, Scott grinned. And you haven't brushed your teeth, have you? Nope. Scott's grin grew wider. You're disgusting, said Mom, resignation in her voice. I'm a teenage boy, said Scott. What do you expect? Mom handed each of her children a granola bar, then motioned them toward the garage. I still don't see why I can't just take the next bus, said Scott as he buckled himself into the front passenger seat. Scott took the city bus to high school, not a school bus like George did. Because the next bus isn't for 45 minutes, and by that time you'll have missed first period. Mom backed the car out of the garage and down the driveway. It's only English. I already speak English. Real goodly. You're a laugh riot, Scotto. As Mom drove, she rambled on about how she needed a new alarm clock and how really her children were old enough to get up on their own anyway. And hadn't she bought Scott up an alarm clock last year for Christmas for that very reason? George stayed out the back seat window, counting telephone poles. When she was little, her grandfather had told her that if she counted 100 telephone poles in a row, an electric fairy would grant her one wish. George didn't really believe in the electric fairy anymore, and sometimes she didn't even know what she was wishing for. But counting telephone poles had become a comforting habit. So what do you think, thinking about the electric fairy, what do you think she would wish for? I think that she would wish for everyone to accept her secret and to accept her for who she is, a girl, when she finally lets it out. You guys agree? Nice. All right. Room 205 buzzed as students filed in and hung their jackets and book bags in the coat closet. A group of girls gathered by the pencil sharpener around Maddie and Emma, who showed off the matching temporary pink stakes that Maddie's older sister had put into their hair the night before. Miss Adele suddenly pointed at George and motioned with one finger for her to come up to the teacher's desk. The desk had probably been in the same room since the school was built. It might have even been older than Miss Adele. The original shiny coating was worn away completely in some places and deeply scratched in the rest. If you dug your fingernail into the desk hard enough, you could leave a mark in the waxy varnish. You surprised me yesterday, George. Miss Adele said, her reading glasses perched on her head. I can't cast you as Charlotte, of course. I have too many girls who want that part. So, after Miss Adele says I have too many girls who want that part, how do you think that makes George feel? Because remember, she truly feels she is a girl. So when her teacher does not acknowledge that, don't you think that would make her feel really sad, maybe angry, maybe disappointed, defeated? Do you guys agree? Yeah, I think so too, because those are all great ways to describe how George is feeling. I know George hoped that Miss Adele would let her take her seat. But, Miss Adele continued, you did a good job. You have passion and dedication. Are you sure you don't want another part? You could be Wilbur. Wilbur, the dirty pig? George shook her head. That would be worse than not being in the play at all. Or one of the other boys' parts. Templeton? Mr. Zuckerman? The gander? No thanks. Perhaps a narrator then? The narrators have a really important role. They keep the audience informed. George shook her head. She didn't want to be in the play. Watching someone else be Charlotte? Well, okay, Miss Adele eyed George warily. I guess you can be in the crew. The classroom door opened and Kelly bounded in. Did I get a part? Did I? Miss Adele's focus turned to the bubble of ebullience bouncing in front of her. Kelly, you will find out about your part when everyone else does. At the end of the day. Kelly gave an exaggerated sigh and headed off to the coat closet to join the group of girls huddled around Maddie and Emma. Miss Adele turned back to where George had been, but George had already disappeared to her seat. As promised, Miss Adele didn't share the names of the students in the play until the final moments of the school day, at which point she distributed scripts to the actors and gave some advice on how to memorize their lines. Kelly would be Charlotte. When she found out, she jumped nearly out of her seat and whooped with glee. How do you think that's making George feel? Because he's been dying to be Charlotte, right? Or she has. So if she's dying to be Charlotte, she finds out that Kelly, her best friend, has gotten the role that she really wants. How do you think George is feeling? Yeah, I'd imagine she's feeling really sad at this point. Then she turned to smile at George, but George had turned her head to face the closet. Shielding her eyes from view with her hand, it was bad enough that she wouldn't be Charlotte. Now she would have to listen to Kelly talk about it and possibly nothing else for the next 3 weeks. Miss Adele continued to read the cast list. Chris would play Templeton. He let out a deep yeah and pumped his fist in the air. Maddie and Emma and several other kids would play the barnyard animals, and most of the rest of the kids who had tried out would be narrators. Kids from Mr. Jackson's class would be playing the parts of Wilbur and Fern. George's name wasn't even said at all. George knew she couldn't have possibly expected to hear Miss Adele call her name. Still, her heart sank. She had genuinely started to believe that if people could see her on stage as Charlotte, maybe they would see that she was a girl off stage, too. She makes a really good point. When her row was called, George grabbed her book bag and got away from the other kids at the closet as quickly as she could. She packed her math workbook and her science reader. Room 205 headed down to the yard for dismissal. George didn't pay attention when the class stopped to regroup. Several times she bumped into the backpack in front of her. The moment the class stepped onto the schoolyard, Kelly dashed out of the girls' line and over to George. How come you're not in the play? She asked. Miss Adele said everyone who tried out would get a part. And I thought for sure Miss Adele would make you Wilbur. You were so good this weekend. Rehearsals are going to be totally boring without you. Another voice chimed in. Yeah, George, how come you're not in the play? George cringed, recognizing Rick's voice behind him. Jeff almost never talked directly to George unless he had something really mean to say. But George wasn't surprised to see them both there when she turned around. Last week you were all crying about the poor little spider, Rick continued, and we saw you go out and audition. How bad did you have to be for Chris to get that part? I bet he read the stupid spider's part by mistake. Jeff smirked. He's such a freaking girl anyway. So, are Jeff and Rick being kind and respectful to George right now? How do you think this is making George feel? How do you think he's going to react? I want you to turn and talk to your partners and think about how you think George is going to react to them saying that to her. Raise your hand if you'd like to share what you and your partner discussed. Yeah, I think she'll start crying and maybe run home, or maybe she's going to say something really mean back. Let's read and see. Jeff guffawed, and Rick laughed alongside him, so he kind of scuffled. Don't listen to them, Kelly tugged at the elbow of her best friend's shirt, but George stood, stuck in place. The hairs on her arms stood straight up, and the back of her neck tingled. Or maybe he just read it all backwards, said Rick. Nio. Jeff made a horrific sound, attempting to oink backward. Rick joined him, and they snorted across the playground toward the gate where parents sat in cars in a line down the block. She didn't exhale until Rick and Jeff passed through the gate. They didn't know her secret, or else they wouldn't have dropped it so quickly. But their guest had been so close that George's cheeks flushed with shame. She relaxed her hands, which had formed in a fist, but her teeth were still clenched. That's how angry she was. She was like, ugh. There, jerk, said Kelly. You're not a girl. What if I am? George was startled by her own words. So thinking about that, what if I am? George was startled by her own words. Do you think that she's going to tell her secret to Kelly? How do you think she's feeling now? I want you to go ahead and turn to your partner and see and talk about and discuss how you think she's feeling now. Raise your hand if you'd like to share. Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think that she's anxious, scared, nervous. All of those are great adjectives to describe how George is feeling at the moment. All right, let's keep reading. Kelly drew back in surprise. What? That's ridiculous. You're a boy. I mean, she pointed vaguely downward at George. You have a you-know-what, right? Yeah, but... George trailed off and looked at the ground. She kicked a small rock that skipped into a tuft of grass. She didn't feel like a boy. They stood together in a heavy silence. Kelly's brow furrowed in thought. After a few moments, she spoke. You know, I thought about whether I was a boy once. Back when I wanted to be a firefighter and I thought all firefighters were boys. Is it like that? I don't think so, Kelly. The lines in front of the buses had mostly disappeared, and the drivers were only waiting for the final okay to start their routes. They had begun to turn over their engines, and the air filled with heavy rumbling and the fumes of diesel exhaust. George had a sudden frightening thought and grabbed Kelly's arm just above the elbow. Don't tell anyone. I won't. George's grip on Kelly's arm grew uncomfortable. Not even your dad, okay? Not even my dad, George. They ran to their respective buses, the soles of their sneakers slapping on the blacktop, calling 1, 2, 3, and zoop behind them. The school bus left George at the corner and drove off, its engine straining to pick up speed. George walked the half block to her house and turned up the driveway. She fumbled with the house key, balancing her book bag on one knee while she turned the key to the right. But the door was already unlocked and pushed open easily. Mom sat on the couch. You're home, said George. What's this about? Asked Mom. Her expression was flat. George's denim bag swung slowly in the air, hanging from one crooked finger. The zipper was open. George's heart pounded, and for a moment she thought she might burst on the spot. She took a deep gulp of air. I was feeling under the weather today, so I came back home to do some cleaning, said Mom. Your closet was a mess, and I found these. Did you steal them? So the mom says, your closet was a mess. Well, think about what she found. She's asking, did you steal them? Steal what? So what is she referring to? Was it a note to Kelly? Was it girl clothes? Was it her magazines? How do you think George is feeling now? Nervous, anxious, scared, angry that she violated his privacy, maybe? Yeah, let's read and see. I mean, how would you feel if your parents went through your stuff? Probably a little upset, but they are your parents. No, George's face was hot. I collected them. Don't lie to me. Where did you get them? Mom pulled out the copy of 17 from last October. The smiling twins on the cover, unaware of Mom's tight grip. I found them in different places. Mom eyed George, her eyebrows thick and heavy. She stood with a deep sigh. George, I don't want to find you wearing my clothes or my shoes. That kind of thing was cute when you were 3, but you're not 3 anymore. In fact, I don't want to see you in my room at all. But I didn't, George began, but Mom ignored her. Mom disappeared to her bedroom with the denim bag in her hand. George remained by the front door, her mouth slightly open. She couldn't believe her friends were actually gone. So, she says she couldn't believe that her friends were gone. Who's she referring to? The kids at school? Kelly because she went home? Who do you think she's referring to? Go ahead and turn to your partner and talk about who do you think she's referring to. Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to share. Yeah, I think she's referring to the girls in the magazines. She had become friends with them because she saw herself in a mirror in those magazines, as a mirror in those magazines. She developed a sort of relationship with them because she wanted to be one of them so badly. All right, now thinking back to the chapters before. And Alex Gino, he included the play Charlotte's Web. Do you think that was incidental or intentional choice for a play within this book? You think it was intentional? Why do you say that? You have a good point. Yeah. I think Charlotte's Web is a book about really seeing people and accepting people for who they are, whether they're people, pigs, spiders. And it's about deep friendship between all of those animals, right? And so those two themes I think are pretty central in this story. Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. So after reading this chapter, do you think that she is going to tell her mom, her brother, everyone else? Well, you're going to have to read the rest of this novel to find out. But before we do that, in wrapping up the chapter, what central message do you think the author is sending to the reader, to us? Or what themes do you think are present within the novel so far? Someone said courage, individuality, acceptance. Yeah, I think she has to have acceptance from not only herself, accepting the fact that she is a transgender, or acceptance from others like Kelly, Scott, her mom, maybe her dad. Yeah, I think it's also about loyalty from friends like Kelly and her brother Scott. Yeah. I also think, guys, that this is a lesson about empathy. I think it's an empathy towards others' feelings and how we're all battling something, but it may not be this specific thing. It might be battling about, your physical appearance, your hair, your face. You might have acne. We're all battling something, but this teaches us about acceptance and empathy and just being courageous. Like, be proud of who you are. Be who you are. And on the back of this book, it actually says that. Be who you are. I think that sends a really strong message to us as readers. Nice job today, guys.